Welcome everyone to Art of Negotiation in and out of the boardroom. We are so excited to have you here today and hear from this badass panel on negotiations. Bryant said, I'm Katy Adams with Highwoods Properties on the leasing team for the Atlanta portfolio. And negotiations aren't just about the million-dollar deals and boardroom strategies. It's something we use daily. We want this to be an interactive discussion and hear from our industry leaders, their thoughts and real-world experiences and lessons learned from years in the business. So today we have Diana Campbell, Senior Partner at Dudley Spade, Specialized Real Estate. Jodi Selvey, Vice Chair and Principal at Colliers and a former Commercial Board President. Brooke Dewey, Senior Managing Director at JLL and this year's $1 Million Club #1 agency producer. And Audra Cunningham, Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer at T. Dallas Smith & Co. So, ladies, thank you so much for coming here today. First thing, let's go down the row, starting with Diana. And if you could tell us about your current role, how you end up where you are, and who you negotiate with the most. Do they push?
Oh, there we are. We're in the green. Good morning, everyone. Diana Campbell, Associate Broker and Senior Partner at Dudley Spade, Specialized Real Estate. I've been in brokerage for 7 years. I've done a lot of different transactions across almost all of the asset types, certainly office, a lot of warehouse, some retail. And been on both sides of the negotiating table in terms of working with buyers and tenants, as well as landlords and owners. Broad range of clients as well, mom and pop. I even did a stint with Starbucks up in Philadelphia and also working with government entities. So now my work is coalescing into 2 areas. One is around industrial, tenant rep, and listing warehouse properties, and the other is with government entities. So I have 3 school districts that I represent in Georgia. Before real estate, and I want to mention before real estate because I came to real estate pretty late. I was the ripe old age or young age of 47 before I got started here. But before real estate, I was in STEM education. I was a nonprofit leader in the STEM education sector. And so that also brought me before a wide range of constituents, universities, corporations, schools, and a wide range of folks that we were serving. So everyone from women who were getting PhDs in mathematics to at-risk, under-leveraged young adults. And I mention that because my philosophy around negotiating is really based on teaching and learning. That's how I still see the world, and that's absolutely how I see negotiating in commercial real estate. I also, again, because I came to this at 47, I'm a wife and mother of 28 years, and you know, negotiating with a spouse will put some years on you. But that's me. In terms of who I negotiate with most, I would say I negotiate most with clients, and then with my husband, and then with landlords and owners of properties.
Good afternoon. My name's Jodi Selvey, Vice Chair at Colliers. I have been doing commercial real estate for longer than some of you, although this is an older crowd for ACBR, I will say that, so thank you for that. But I've been doing this forever. I did 10 years of retail when I first got into the business, and I've done 25 years of office occupier services. I negotiate pretty much with anyone that comes within 10 feet of me on any given topic. That's the truth, and my husband would tell you that's the truth. But I negotiate probably on a daily basis mostly with landlord agents, similar to Brooke. And I negotiate on behalf of my clients. I try not to negotiate too much with my clients because that tends not to be great. I negotiate with my kids. And, you know, I think that negotiation is something that is a constant learning stream. It never changes. It never is static. There's always a way to learn to do things differently. And that's one of the things I love about what I do every day. Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm Brooke Dewey. I am a senior managing director with JLL. I got into the business at the age of 24 years old. So I think now I've been with JLL for about 18 years, all on the landlord side. So my clients own commercial office buildings. I primarily work on trophy, Class A, and mixed use, both in the traditional class and the creative class. So my clients tend to be more institutional owners. I do represent the Braves with their leased space out at the Battery. So I do have a couple of fun accounts too. I negotiate with tenant rep brokers primarily. I think Jodi said it best. I consult with my clients, try not to get into more of a negotiation there. And then I negotiate with my 3 kids that vary in ages from 23 to 12. And they all have different little styles and approaches with me. And so I think part of our conversation today may be how you change kind of your style or how you approach different people in your life in terms of, how you negotiate or discuss and work through issues. So that's me.
Thank you, Brooke. Audra Cunningham, Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer with T. Dallas Smith & Company. I, too, came into the industry 15 years ago after a 23-year career in telecommunications and absolutely love what I do. I represent tenants, mostly office, but I do some retail and industrial, and spent 2 years on the landlord side representing the Physicians Realty Trust, a healthcare REIT, representing them, leasing 3.5 million square feet so I could get the Brooke experience, so I could be a better tenant rep broker. I will tell you, I negotiate all day, every day, so there's not a whole lot of negotiation going on in my home. I married a good one, and he gets it. So my kids probably wish I would negotiate a little bit more with them, but they need to bring a little bit more to the table, so until they do, I don't. I agree. It is, I mean, everything's a negotiation. Also, I do, and a lot of the brokers that I coach, I do tell them, you have to manage your clients and you have to consult with your clients because they just don't know what they don't know. And it makes the transaction go a lot smoother. And I think that they get a little bit more trust and you have more credibility when you manage your clients that way. So I am thrilled to be here. Negotiation is the biggest part of what we all do, and being able to negotiate. I'm negotiating against a Brooke all day, every day, and building those relationships and knowing when to give a little and when to try to push a little is important for the relationship and the ultimate transaction. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for that. I know 2 of us up here, Diana and Audra, did not come from a real estate or commercial real estate background. I was wondering about how those skills from your previous job kind of transferred over or differentiate you now that you're in this commercial real estate position.
Well, so again, I approach negotiating as teaching and learning, and so part of the differentiator is that stance, right? And so whether you're consulting or managing your clients, it is about understanding who they are and where they're coming from and understanding that there's a progression. Like you can have that amazing first meeting or second meeting or third meeting, and then you're finding out something new on the fourth, or right when you get into the middle of the transaction, something comes up, right? And so having a stance that you're always in this process of making sure that what you conveyed is actually absorbed. You can do a wonderful presentation and it not be understood. And so there's this responsibility as the one who's doing the teaching that the person on the other side is actually absorbing what it is you have to offer. And so when I think of it in that way, which is very different than I think a lot of people who maybe come from sort of more hard-nosed or more traditional commercial real estate experiences, I think that becomes a differentiator, the way I progress my understanding of my clients and their understanding of me.
No, I think that's a great question. So actually, when I got ready to transition, I did this exercise with some of the leadership of Bell South and said, what do you think the transferable skills would be? And what areas do you think that I could improve going into commercial real estate? And a lot of the feedback that I got was being trustworthy, being a good listener, an excellent communicator, not interrupting people when they are trying to explain something to you. I tell people all the time, you're not listening if you're talking, because we can't do both. And then just being thoughtful and intentional in your decision-making. And I do take into consideration what Brooke has to get for her client when we're going to negotiate. I mean, there has to be a win-win for everyone. So I understand with my clients right up front what is most important for you, and then work from there.
Perfect. And then I'm going to address this next one to Jodi and Brooke. How do you adjust your negotiation approach to different personalities, gender, culture, and so on without stereotyping or obviously stereotyping them in a negative way?
So I'll take that. I think that you have to know the personality, or at least something about the person that you're getting ready to enter into a negotiation with. And I think most everyone here has heard of the DISC scale. Driver, influencer, steady, and what's the C? Concise? Oh, no, conscientious.
Yes.
As a high I, high D, which is driver influencer, if I'm negotiating with the CFO, which is what I do a lot of the time, I have to change my approach completely, because what they want to hear is, what are the numbers, what are the numbers, what are the numbers? And it's how I present the numbers. And I see a lot of inexperienced people, whether it's in real estate or not, make a presentation to someone like a CFO, and they type out this whole paragraph. And the guy goes, delete. Because that's not what they want to see. They want to see bullet points and what's the bottom line. So I change how I negotiate depending on who it is. If I'm talking with the CAO or the CEO, and he's like excited about new office space and am I going to be able to recruit and retain, I'm going to tell him all about, you know, the amenities and different things. I'm going to get excited along with him and bring him into the fold. And he's going to go, okay, now go talk to Mike about the numbers. So it's a very different thing. So I adjust it based on, I use the DISC scale in my head a lot.
Similar. If y'all have ever heard of Enneagram, it's another personality type. There's 9 different personality types. I think it's the root of it is really understanding who you're across the table from. And again, this can be family and friends and colleagues and clients. It's understanding their style and how they think, and what maybe even their triggers too. You know, as Jodi was explaining some of like her style, I couldn't help but think too, you know, at least for my team, that's how we actually team and approach our projects, our assets that we lease. I think the same is true for JLL and the tenant rep side. You have different personality types on your teams that may interface better with different people within the organization. So if you're strong, you know, in kind of that math acumen, you know, to be able to kind of present to the people that need to be updated on those things, matching people up with that kind of same or similar personality type or knowledge base is pretty important.
Absolutely. And I was talking to Diana earlier about CCIM. I'm working on my CCIM as well. Well, not as well. You already have yours. But we recently had a conversation where they split up our room and negotiate against each other. We come to a stalemate after 20 minutes. Nobody wants to give. I'm wondering, how do you negotiate? Like, are you more candid, you know, saying this is a must for my tenant? Do you kind of show your cards, or do you kind of hold them close, or does it depend who you're transacting with?
I think every situation calls for something different in the same regard of just understanding what the context is. You might have a great candid conversation with a CEO where it's a much more bottom line conversation with a CFO. I'll give you a quick vignette. When I was working with Starbucks, the person who was my Starbucks representative, we would be this far apart in numbers from what the landlord wanted to what Starbucks wanted. And the person I was working with, her name is Rahel, she would always say, "Wow, that's really tough." And I was thinking, how are you going to get here, And it almost didn't matter to her, and I kind of took a note to that. We were just staying in conversation. Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we would just be talking, and then we'd hang up the phone, and I'm thinking, we haven't gotten anywhere, but we haven't stopped either, right? And so this idea of keeping in my mind, my big learning is there's got to be a way to keep a conversation going. If you want the deal to happen, you can't cut it off. And so even if it looks ridiculously far apart, there's still a way to say, well, you know what, next time let's talk about this, or can you go back and find about these attributes of the deal, and let's keep, and so there was just constantly, let's keep talking, and depending on who you're representing and if they have enough weight, the conversation will kind of keep going. Yeah.
I was wondering if anybody else might have some real-world examples where it was just easier to put all the cards out on the table, or they showed the cards and maybe it wasn't the best result, because not all negotiations end
Right.
with a deal.
I mean, one of the things that I do with almost all my deals, and a lot of it depends on who the broker is on the other side, but this is a relationship business, no matter if you're on the landlord, the tenant. So it's so important to forge those relationships before you have to come into a negotiation. Always take the opportunity, have a coffee, have a lunch, go have a drink with the landlord brokers or your clients or your wannabe clients or whoever it is, because when you have that relationship going in, you can then be very strategic and very transparent. I know that, and not everyone does this, I like the brokers to kind of know, here's the bottom line. And there's usually a little bit of room, because I'd be stupid not to, but I'm very transparent in what my client needs. And I think that the landlord side appreciates that, because sometimes there's no amount of space where we can get together. Let's call a spade and move on, and I'll go to another building. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you can get from here to here a lot quicker. And so I just sent that message to Washington for the debt ceiling discussion.
Thank you.
I think that's right. I think the best brokers, I know, I always try the very beginning, whether it's a tour or it's the very first conversation I have with Audra or Jodi. So what are the driving factors of this decision? And if you can figure that out on the front end, and then I go back and I communicate with my client, this is what's most important. So let's keep this in mind. And then let's aim to go and achieve these points. And then when we're in the middle of it, if, I start feeling pushback on something that wasn't necessarily initially disclosed as a driving factor of the deal, then I can kind of go back and remind my colleagues, my partners, that hey, but you told me this was the most important. Well, this point is one of the most important things to my client. So we need to work through this to achieve that win-win scenario for us. There's a lot of compromise there, but I think the way to kind of get to the end is to understand that at the front end, and then clearly start setting some expectations as you work through the process.
I can't agree more. Jodi hit the nail on the head. The relationships are important. I don't see a benefit to not being transparent up front. I mean, because it's all we have is time, and who wants to waste any of it? And at the end of the day, I mean, we can go back and forth one or two times, and I typically just pick up the phone. Okay, here is where we're apart, and here is where I need to be. Tell me why you need to be here, and why is this most important to you? And that way I can go back to my client, and I can have a conversation with them, and I can be logical in how we're making our decisions. It builds credibility, and it builds trust throughout the entire transaction and everyone that's involved. That's been my experience. And there are some times where you're just not going to get there, and it's okay. And we're all going to be okay and move on to the next one. But being transparent and being thoughtful in the ask. There's sometimes I have to tell my clients, no, we're not asking for that. That's just not reasonable. And here's why it's not reasonable. And if you want them to take you seriously, we need to go back to them with something that's a reasonable ask based off of where we are. And they get it. I mean, again, that's the trust that they have in me, that one, I want to make this happen, and two, they know I'm working on their behalf to the best of my ability.
Well, and just to add on one more thing, I think it's very important as you're negotiating on behalf of your client, and one would hope that we all do this, but not always. You can be really good at negotiation, but if you don't actually know the facts of where you can push based on previous deals, and you've got some comparable deals to go back and to say, that's unreasonable. One of the only things that we have to sell is information. We are in the information game. And so if you come to the table with information, and even if your client says, I need to get this much in tenant improvement, and the landlord says, no, you're out of your mind, and then you can produce, here are the last 5 comps of similar buildings, and they got it, both parties can come together.
Kind of following up on that, how do you keep emotions out of this when you're negotiating? And to me, you don't want this to be confrontational, like you're trying to be persuasive, like you don't want people to know, you sound like a used car salesman, you're trying to be persuasive without showing it too much.
So I've gotten in trouble a lot with emotion, and you would think after 100 years that it would not be that way, but it is, because we're human. And most people in this business, or at least a large percentage, are type A. And I have found that it's really easy to send a nastygram via email or text, type it out, and then erase it, and sit back and send it to yourself and read it again for the first time. Because we can't read into how you think it's coming over. And that's just a little bit of saving grace for me.
So I'll tell you, just this morning, I had a meeting with a broker that was on the other side of a deal. Everything went sideways, and he made disparaging comments, and I was okay until he made the disparaging comments. So we had to meet face to face. And it stemmed from the junior broker I was working with. He wanted to blame it all on him. And I said, well, you kept taking me off the email. And by the way, you could have called me. You could have picked up the phone and said, oh, hey, Audra, as the senior broker on the deal. And his response was, I thought you just managed the office or you were the assistant. So so when you want to talk about emotions, and I just stayed as calm and dispassionate, but I share that story because I learned early on, I'm a unicorn in this business. They're coming for me, okay? And that was something to get a rise out of me, and it didn't work. And I said, I don't know what rock you live and sleep under, but I think most people in this city know exactly who I am and know what I do. So, and that was a dig. So I'm not gonna get the benefit of the doubt if I come back swinging the way that I can and the way that I used to when I first got in this business, because I did take it personally. I just was used to coming from a background where everything I accomplished was with a team. And now I'm in the brokerage world where it's like, survival of the fittest. And it didn't work out for me. So I just encourage people to understand none of this is personal. Most of it's all about money. And when you get that part of it, then just keep a calmer head and get to the point. And this morning, we agreed to disagree, and I agreed that I might have to do something a little different. I don't know what that's going to be. I will sit back, and it really wasn't about the money. It was more about my reputation, which is really important to me. I've earned it, and there's not one person that's going to do something to take that away.
I had an example last week where I missed something on a lease draft that I was reviewing, and it went back out to the party, and I had the broker say, well, I thought we agreed to this. And I had to come back and actually admit a mistake. And I think that's really big too, right? We're all human. We've got a gazillion things going on, both work and professionally. And when you can actually just say, that was on me, and I admitted back to that broker, I went back to my client and told them I missed this, and it kind of diffuses the situation. And the same broker, well, the same brokerage team, there was a separate incident that came back a couple of days later on a commission agreement. And he said, well, are we done with this? And he kind of was a little snarky around the edges. You've all probably received emails like that before. And I used humor, and I just said, why are y'all so stressed? Are you worried about the nature of the environment or the economy? It's all going to be okay. We're going to get the commission agreement signed, and you're going to be paid on the deal. So I think it's just your style to be human, infuse humor when you can, count to 3, retype an email. There's definitely times during all this where I think I've definitely fallen into the category of and I've regretted it. But yeah, it's relationship business. We've got to kind of do this with each other, hopefully for years to come.
I know we've been talking a lot about the client side, but what about negotiation in the office? If you're asking your boss for a raise and you get a no and get emotional, what happens next? How do we deal with negotiating with people we work with every day? Is it different? Same?
So I'm going to slightly defer on this just because our office is very small and we don't have sort of the same kind of tiers. But back to the teaching and learning, if there was something I felt like I needed in the office, my first stance is, okay, what do I understand about the way this office operates and the context, comps, if you will, within the office, and how am I thinking about this in terms of the broker and how he relates to the rest of the team that's here? I can ask for something for me. What does that mean for Monica? She works with us in our office, right? And so I think some of those same principles of just understanding what the nature of your office is have to be probably really important.
I would say this, I can't ask for a raise because I get paid nothing, but I do hear from a lot of friends, female friends, and this is the one thing that I will tell you that I hear consistently that I just, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. And they're like, well, it's my review and I want a raise. And so I'm going to go tell them, I really need to make more money. Wah, wah, wah. Everybody needs to make more money. And I said, don't ever, ever walk into a meeting and say, I need to make more money. What you can do is say, since last year, these are the 5 things that I've accomplished, and because of that, I believe I have earned X amount or a raise or whatever it is. So don't ever go into a negotiation, especially a lot of times it's female to male, and so they get nervous. And as long as you know what your worth is, you will win almost every time if you come in with the facts and the figures and the why. But don't go in with the need, go in with the why.
Yeah, similar to you, I mean, we're straight commission, so there's nothing that we get on top of that. But I was thinking about this question in a relationship of, I now co-lead our agency team. So I have people that come to me, not for money, but for other things. And then I also report, obviously, up through the senior leadership of our firm. And just that, how does that work, both in how am I reacting to the people on our team, and then how am I maybe even reacting to certain things that are kind of coming down from the top that I have to implement, or that we're trying to kind of change and adapt and reform, for our people. And, I think in relation to both of those, it's just knowing information. It's going back to know the style of the people that you're working with or you're talking to first. But it's also doing your homework and, the research around, well, what's going on? If the company is cost cutting or we're in a downsizing mode and unfortunately we're laying off people, well, maybe now is not the right time to ask for X, right? Maybe what we need to focus on are these things. And it's just, it's being a good listener, and it's pulling in what is affecting those people that maybe are on my team, and how can I help support them or advocate for them, and what's reasonable that I need to kind of push back and say, well, now's not the time, but let's maybe readdress this in 6 months. And then vice versa, like on the upper side, it's, I don't fundamentally agree with this change. Is there anything that we can do to open this up, to have some further dialogue about it? And this is why maybe we need to have some more conversation about this. Hopefully that makes sense. But I think it's understanding both sides, being good listeners, and taking in the information and just trying to put yourselves in those shoes.
And even as brokers, we do have to negotiate splits with other brokers, and our colleagues are our internal customers, so those relationships matter. I feel it's important for people to have confidence in themselves. Some people feel uncomfortable with self-promotion. To Jodi's point, if people don't know what you're doing and what you've accomplished and what you've done, then, how did you earn anything? Now, how you do that without being boastful and arrogant, you just have to strike that balance. But if you're not comfortable advocating for your accomplishments and the things that you've done, or advocating for your equitable portion of a transaction, how do you expect anybody else to go advocate for you? So you have to find that confidence within to have those conversations, and to help you find that confidence, just understand this is what you get up every day and go to work for. That's how I found it. It was like, okay, I'm not here. This isn't charity work. So I believe in what I've done, and I believe in what I've earned. And until somebody can tell me differently, then we need to have a conversation about it. So I just want people to be comfortable with that self-promotion piece about your accomplishments, bringing in a big transaction, or saving a transaction that was about to go south, something that you did. Let people know about it.
I just want to add one thing that we haven't touched upon, and that is, before going and asking for more, also just reflecting on how have you contributed to your office outside of just the money that you've brought in. How are you carrying the culture? We're representing our offices right now in service to our offices and our culture and and who we represent. And so, how did you participate? Did you show up at the last party or event or networking? And so all of those things matter, because in the end, we're all people creating an environment where we can all be productive. And so if the only thing you want out of it is money, then you're fighting a harder battle to get more.
So I'm going to throw out the big question out there. Do you feel men and women negotiate differently? And if you feel that way, what do you think each side does well or better than the other side?
I'll take that.
Is this question to the audience? She said she don't throw it out. Is it to the audience?
Not yet. We can.
I think that men and women in some cases negotiate differently. And where I see the biggest difference is in is in confidence. Now, if you're a female in commercial real estate, you're probably not lacking confidence, but in some situations, they'll go into a meeting, you might walk into a meeting where you're presenting, and this happens to me all the time, there could be 6, 8 men in the room and me. And am I going to present differently to a group of men or a group of women? Typically, I won't. I mean, I'm going to do my thing and give the type of presentation that I was going to do. But I see it with male brokers talking to male brokers. It's like, hey, dude, I need $50 a square foot. And, all of a sudden they get $50 a square foot where I might have to scratch and claw my way to get that same amount. And it's not right or wrong. It's just that we're still going through the motions of how do we all work together. And you can't get mad about it. You just have to get better at what you do. And that's the best way to solve the equation in my book.
And to tag on that, I know when we were on our prep call, you kind of talked how women kind of build a relationship more, I don't want to say emotionally, but like, we'll ask the question, how are your kids? Where are you from?
Right.
Like, and I know the last time we had this, you're like, break bread with the people, like build
Yes.
the forever connection, not just the right now.
As we were having lunch before this started, Jodi and I were catching up on the lake and graduations and kids and summer plans, and it goes back to the relationship of people in this business, and that makes sometimes the more awkward or harder parts of what we do a little bit more bearable. And again, it just goes back to if Jodi needs $50 a square foot to get this deal done, then that's, again, one of those driving factors of that deal that gets presented in the beginning, and we start working to try to figure out if we can do that or not.
But don't let anyone intimidate you with your ask, and build the bridge. I went to a Colliers conference probably 15 years ago, and they had this keynote speaker, and he stood up on the stage. There were probably 1,500 people in the room. He was barefoot. And everyone's like, why's that dude barefoot? And he said, I bet y'all are wondering why I'm barefoot. And everyone's like, yeah. He goes, because I walk back and forth on the stage, and I want to know where the edge is, and I can feel it with my toes. And I was like, okay, that makes lots of sense. And then he went into this whole thing about negotiating and relationships with people. And he said, as soon as you break bread with your client, whether it's coffee, lunch, dinner, they are now your friend, and they're no longer your client. And I think men are very good at that. They go out a lot. Men go out a lot with men. But it can be awkward with a woman going out for a drink or whatever with a man. But I think as long as you're confident in the why, it's going to serve you very well. And I would challenge everyone to take one person and see what happens when you do that if you haven't done it.
And I would say there is a difference, to answer your question. Our emotional intelligence, I think, is a little, we have a little bit more of a radar on that. The empathy, the compassion, the softer side, how we ask can sometimes be much different than how men do. And I mean, but again, I'm one of those women that it's not hard for me to ask questions. It's not hard for me to stand up. It's not hard for me to ask for more money. I know most women aren't like that. So I do kind of hesitate about the man-woman because I might have some male traits in me. But I mean, I just think you are who you are in your negotiation and in your career, and just be comfortable with who you are and where you are in your career. I agree. You have to break bread, not just with your clients, but break bread with other brokers. I get so busy, and I love it when Brooke just emails me and is like, hey, let's grab lunch. Yes, let's grab lunch. I started playing golf. There's nowhere else you can go and spend 4.5 hours with someone one-on-one and it not be awkward. It's just the best thing in the world. I don't know where my ball is going half the time, but we have a daggone good time. So, I mean, find your niche on what that is. If you like to go to the arts, I mean, invite your client to go to the High with you or something. You have to spend time with them them outside of the art of the deal, or it just becomes a client-broker relationship.
And it also makes it, if you don't have those deep relationships,
Yeah.
it's really easy for the client to get a call from somebody else and go, oh, new shiny toy, and they get rid of you.
Who's going to take me somewhere?
Right,
And we're going to
right.
have fun. And Audra never did that for me, so yes, exactly.
So I had a client who was having a tough time, and he had to go to court. I did not need to show up in court. It really wasn't my issue, but I knew he was going to be there all day. So my husband makes pound cakes all the time. Our freezer is filled with pound cakes. So I grabbed a couple of bags, and I hung out with him in court all day with he and his lawyer, and we ate pound cake all day. So you do have to find those opportunities. And this client, by the way, was from Florida. So he was, so I got him from the airport and just tried to help him with the day that was going to be pretty tough for him. So you do, as a woman, have to find opportunities, because it is a little weird to say to a dude, hey, I want to go out for drinks after. Like, I don't know. It's just, it can be a little awkward, and you never know what their situation is. So 100% finding opportunities to break bread is really important.
So to build on the pound cake story.
But I don't think there's as much of a difference between men and women as there is between personality styles. I think that's
agree.
the real piece there, and I'm very much on a masculine side of, like, my husband scolds me because I'm not as empathetic as I could be, and I'm working on it, right? So there's some things that are traditionally feminine where I don't feel like I necessarily fit that mold, but learning the personality styles is the real, I think, the real key. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So one of the questions was, how do you make yourself memorable, and how do you want people to feel after the negotiation? I know you said the pound cake and just the connection there, but with clients who maybe are only with them for a month and then you don't see them for another 4 years, how do you keep that and keep them having a good feeling about you?
So I'll go ahead and start. I mean, Rita and Dewey are here. Hi. We were just working with a client yesterday, and I mean, all week we were at the end. It was time for her to sign the lease, and I could just tell she had cold feet. And I made it very clear to her that I'm not going to tell you to sign this lease. You're going to sign this lease if you feel good about where we are. Period. End of story. How are you going to get paid? I won't. It's okay. I mean, this is a long-term commitment that you're making, and I need you to feel comfortable about where we landed. Period. End of story. And she did end up signing it, but there was just something about making her feel okay about the cold feet. It was her first time signing a lease. She bought a franchise. It's her first business. All of that is expected. She was not going to get any aggression or any guilt from me, even if she walked away. And I walked her through the process of, okay, because she was having some trouble in other areas. Okay, so let's look at the worst case scenario. Put the lease aside, worst case scenario regarding the franchise, and kind of walked her through that process. To me, those are just traits and experiences that when you have with your client, they never forget. Because the last thing that I ever want is a client to call me a year later, 2 years later, feeling really bad about their decision, and I had something to do with it. Now, they might have done something they shouldn't have done. I can't help that, but not because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So it's important to not focus on the deal. It's really important to focus on your client, their needs at the time, and the bigger, much bigger picture.
Yeah, I would say when I leave a negotiation or a meeting, I want my clients to feel taken care of. That is the number one thing, and that could cross over a lot of different things. It could cross over work. I've maybe addressed an issue they're having personally or professionally. I mean, sometimes I think I'm like an unpaid shrink.
Yeah.
A lot. It's kind of scary. But I think that is the number one thing, is that when you leave, even if you're not done with the deal yet, your client's going to call you back and they're going to refer you business, because that's really the number one. That's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Quit pitching, all referrals. And if your client feels taken care of, even if they don't get the deal they want, they're like, she did the best job that she could, and I feel taken care of. That's when it's a win-win.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's trust. It's trust and open communication. And if it's going sideways, you just have to kind of lay it out, and it's going sideways,
Right.
you know? This is not going in the direction we wanted it to go, or we had hoped it would go, but this is where we are headed. And these are our choices right now, right? This is what we can do. It's communicating the benefits and the drawbacks. You know, this is a good deal for these reasons. This is where we could get stung later, or, you know, this is the risk maybe later is probably a better way of saying that. But it's just being open and creating that trust.
And communicating with the person that's on the other side, advocating for their client, because that's most important. Instead of just going silent, just listen. We're at a crossroads here, and give me a minute to work it out. I'm sure I will. And here are the challenges. I mean, maybe the person on the other side can help you work through those challenges, whatever it is. But I know sometimes brokers will go silent, and you sit there and you guess, okay, maybe they're working with someone. You shouldn't have to do that. Just listen. You know, I've got somebody else that jumped in ahead of you because they were ready. They had financing in place. They had everything in place. I mean, you respect that, and then it helps to build that trust, which this industry is so small. It's so small that you really do have to, and even if you're disagreeing, how you disagree. My example from this morning, I mean, there were no hard feelings. I told them none of this was personal, but you know, you just can't disparage people's or impugn people's integrity and their reputation and not be held accountable for that. It's not personal. So I think that's really important.
I think we have time for one more question for me, and it's how do you prepare to negotiate, and how do you maintain your skills? Are we reading books? Are we watching TED Talks? What helps you prepare? And I'll start with you, Diana.
So I'm a CCIM designee, and there's actually a negotiating class that's part of the designation process, but I believe it's open to anyone. And I think that was an awesome class, but YouTube University as well, right? There's so many people out there talking about negotiating, which is really helpful. And then I'll just throw out there that one of my favorite books is Never Split the Difference, and that's a must-read. And I think that speaks to negotiating across the board, cross-discipline, real estate, not real estate.
For me, different ways to learn is I'm a news junkie. I love the news. I get it on my news feed 24/7. I watch the news every night, sometimes twice a night. And you can really learn a lot as you watch the news come at you live, and you see emotions, you see people, you see politicians, how they do and don't work. So I'm just a student all day looking at people's behaviors. I always said if I wasn't doing this, I'd love to be like a psychologist because I love to read people, and that's how I do it.
When I first got into the business, one of the attorneys I worked with recommended a book on how to negotiate an office lease. And that orange book from like the 70s still sits on the shelf in my office. And it has all of these different kind of compromise positions. So very early in my career, when I was actually tasked with doing things that I really didn't know much about, scary thought, I literally would use that like a Bible, right? And turn the pages and really read and understand different provisions. And I think as, you know, as we've changed, as real estate has evolved, as we've become a little bit more sophisticated at this as well. I still go back to my attorneys and I ask, you know, their opinions on certain things. I brainstorm with my colleagues on, hey, I've got this situation. Have you been in a similar, you know, situation, and what did you do, or how did you kind of work through it? I think it's going coming back to people that you trust, that you build your network around, and people that you partner with, whether it's on a legal side or people on your team. And I work through that a lot.
All of the above, the podcast, the books, the everything. Like you, Jodi, I'm a news buff. So I got into the business in 2008, and again, I struggled personally because I just felt really isolated. It just wasn't a very collaborative business coming from where I came from, so I really struggled with that, and I took things personally, so that was just a triple threat that was not good for me. But from the news, what I watched and what I learned, whether you like his politics or not, President Obama taught me humility. And he taught me how to not take things personally. It's no secret that folks came for him. If they weren't for him, they were very, very, very much against him being the first African-American president in this country. And as I sat there and watched him and Michelle Obama just take this with grace, I was like, half the stuff I'm going through is not half as bad as the stuff that's getting spewed at them and all on the front page of the news all over the world. And so really watching them helped me to figure out that half of this stuff is really not that serious. It will be over. This too shall pass, as our grandmamas would say, and just have class, have humility, have grace, give people grace. Again, I figured out a lot of this is not so much about I don't like Audra. It's really more about I want more of the money than I'm going to give to Audra. So once you realize that, then you can easily just try to get to some place in the middle.
I love that, and thank you. That kind of summed it up, I feel like. So I'm going to open up if there's any questions floating around.
Angie has
Real quick, yeah?
Good question. How did you guys determine, or what process did you go through to determine what you want to specialize in?
Oh, I can tell you, I had this whole scientific process. I'd been an end user for 23 years. I was the move captain twice for Bell South. And I just figured office tenant, and I didn't want to do retail because I love to shop, and I thought that would be detrimental to my life. And development, I like to wear dresses and pearls, and I didn't think that would fit in. So there you go. That's how scientific it was.
So mine was even less scientific. I'm from Jersey, and so I am used to looking at warehouses, and I was like, man, I want to know what's going on in those warehouses, and that's literally how I knew. And then also with the government services that I'm doing now, I think that's just kind of drawing back from my experience in education. So I gravitated to those two things just based on kind of who I am and what I was seeing in my world.
Yeah. I came out of consumer products, sales straight out of college, and I wanted to get into commercial real estate because I needed an unlimited income. And I didn't know office from tenant from warehouse. I just heard commercial real estate, and I saw an ad for a retail broker, and I answered it, like in the paper, which doesn't happen anymore. And anyway, I did that, and then I started helping some retail clients with office space, and I found out that the fees were a lot better on the office side, so I switched.
I graduated from school with a business degree and a concentration in marketing. And so when I got into the business, I was trying to figure out whether or not I was going to go into agency side, landlord rep, or tenant rep. And I felt like the marketing side better suited my agency representation because I could kind of take that. But I also, this is as naive as I was when I was 24 and got into this, I was like, oh, well, I can, a tangible building and a fitness center and a conference center, that sounds pretty easy, right? I can sell this, or I can market this building, and didn't really, and I thought that was going to be easier than hey, I'm Brooke Dewey, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can represent you in this gigantic move to, this, other property, which obviously would have been a total crock of, and didn't realize until later that so much of still what I do, what Jodi does, what Audra does, what everyone around this table does is still sell themselves, right? So, but that's how I got into agency, was my thought process on marketing.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for coming out, and thank you again to our panel today.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.